welcome those who are watching from home. For those of you who are here tonight, we would love for you to sign in right over here. You can also use that form to sign up for our newsletter. My name is Felicia. I am the museum coordinator with the Lacey Museum.
Felicia, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you get a little closer to the
closer.
mic or talk a little louder?
Okay. Our speaker tonight is Dr. Jewel Lorenz-Dunn, who will be sharing her knowledge and insight on accessing and utilizing the state and local archives. Before we dive in, I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement and some museum news. The Lacey Museum is on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, specifically Southern Lushootseed speakers, Nisqually and Squaxin Island. We acknowledge and remember not to forget those tribal people that are named but not recognized today and absorbed into other tribes for survival or were located. We recognize the ancestors and their relations that are still here. Lacey and the South Puget Sound region are encompassed by the Treaty of Medicine Creek, signed under duress in 1854. We respect and affirm tribal sovereignty, and as a part of the city of Lacey, we work with the Nisqually and Squaxin Island tribes in government-to-government partnership. Okay, so on to some museum news. We'd love to see you folks at the museum. We are open Thursdays and Fridays, 11 a.m. to 3. And then on Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 4. The Smithsonian poster exhibit called Journey Stories is finally up. The exhibit explores how movement has shaped our nation with a look at American expansion and migration, from the earliest settlers and Native American displacement to the effects of transportation on modern mobility. The tours that we will have will include local stories, so I definitely encourage you folks to check it out. Okay. Coming next month, we will hope you guys join us again for a March History Talk with Dr. Timothy Ransom. Dr. Ransom is a historian and author and will be sharing the story of Friedrich Richter, a man from the Prussia region of Germany who came to the South Puget Sound in the 19th century. For tonight's presentation, we will hold our Q&A section at the end as usual. We will do our best to get questions from our in-person and online attendees. So for the folks online, if you have any questions during the presentation, feel free to submit them in the Q&A button on your screen. It is usually located at the bottom of your screen. And then for those in person, we will have a microphone that I will be walking around with to share so that for those watching live and then on the recording later, we will be able to hear your questions. Okay, so now I would like to introduce tonight's speaker, Dr. Jewel Lorenz-Dunn. Jewel works in the research department at the Washington State Archives, specializing in genealogy and property research. Jewel's first foray into genealogy was at age 15 when she was invited by her maternal aunt to help record oral histories with great uncles who were born in the late 1880s. She was immediately hooked and soon took over the mantle of family genealogist. In 1985, her job was transferred to Utah, where she solidified her love for genealogy and strengthened her research skills. Jewel has over 23 years of experience using the collections at the Washington State Archives and has been helping researchers in Olympia since 2015. So we would like to thank Jewel for being with us tonight.
Thank you. Hello. How is everybody tonight? Great to be in person again. The world is waking up and we're glad. Okay, I'm going to talk about records in the archives and jot down some questions. If you have any questions at the end, I'd love to answer them.
Jewel, don't forget to speak into the microphone.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have the tendency to move around, so if you can't hear me, just raise your hand and wave at me. The archives of the state of Washington is under the auspice of the Secretary of State. And we have the Washington State Archivist, which is a appointed position. We just got a new archivist. She's a wonderful woman and has done a really fine job since she got there. And our new Secretary of State, Steve Hobbs, took over after Kim left and got reelected. This is our landing page for the Secretary of State. And if you notice the red arrow, that's our archives. If you get on our landing page, you can pick any one of the different departments under the Secretary of State. Right now, we're in 5 different buildings. Hopefully, in the next 3 or 4 years, we're going to be into a new location down in Tumwater. We just got to wait for the pocket gophers to move out. And we have 5 branches. We have the Northwest branch in Bellingham, the Puget Sound in Bellevue, the Southwest one, which is ours in Olympia, the Central, which is in Ellensburg, Eastern in Cheney, and then we also have our digital archives. We have one of the finest digital collections out of all the states in the United States. We're probably one of the most transparent state governments that make our records accessible. A lot of the states aren't as lucky as we are. And here's a map of the different regions and who takes care of the records in their region. You can see in the kind of pinkish, that's the 9 southwest counties of the state of Washington, and those are held in our location in Olympia. And then the north ones are up in Bellingham. King, Pierce, and Kitsap are at our Bellevue. And then our central branch is just that. They take care of the central counties. And then our eastern branch takes care of all of the eastern counties. Now, one thing, we are the state government record keeper also. So besides the 9 southwest counties, we do the state agency records. But the other counties do not take care of the state agency records like we do. So what do we hold? We have state agency records, county records, city and town, corporation records, local municipalities, fire departments, PUD, cemetery districts, diking districts, and those smaller municipalities. We have Supreme Court, State of Washington, and then we have House and Senate bill files, and then we do carry some private records. We are not typically a repository that holds private records. Genealogies, photographs, and that type of things would be carried someplace like the Lacey Museum or the Washington State Historical Society, MOHI up in Seattle. There's different repositories that typically keep photographs, although we do keep photograph collections that might have to do with state officials and that type, or something that has a really high historical value for our area. Now, one thing, when you're researching in the archivist, almost on every page, there's some place where it says, Ask the Archivist. And you can punch the little button and send us an email. That's the fastest way to get an answer. And I'm telling you, it's on almost every page. You just got to find it. We prefer that you call ahead. You can send us an email or call. That's the best way, because besides the 100,000 boxes and volumes we have on location, we have 2 other off-site buildings, and sometimes it does take us a week or so to retrieve records. We couldn't possibly fit them all on. And everybody asks, well, why isn't everything digitized? Well, the taxpayers don't have enough money for us to digitize everything. And, you know, with media changing over time, there is some media that we can't read anymore, like the old floppy disks or some of the old records, actually an LP that they used to keep records on. There's nothing to read it anymore. So we can do some VHS and beta, and we can digitize some records in a small. We do have security measures. We are a locked facility. You cannot come and go as you please. You have to be buzzed into the building, and we do ask that people put stuff in their lockers. We don't allow food, but we are a secure building, and we take our protecting the records serious. The archive materials that we typically have are paper. We do have digital-born records that go straight on to the digital archives, like deeds and records through the Department of Health and things that people indexes so people can locate records and where they might be. The records may be off-site, and like I said, it can take up to a week to retrieve them. And we do have restricted access, and I don't care if you're my mother standing in front of me, I still won't let you see them. There are some records that are covered by either an RCW, the Revised Code of Washington, or some type of federal law or state law of why they're restricted. And it doesn't matter who it is standing there. I can't let some records be seen because of a law, and that would be the only reason why you couldn't see something. There's some school records, such as grades. They're covered under a federal law, FERPA, and so you can't look at somebody's grades if we have them in a certain time period. There are restrictions that have been lifted. They just lifted in January of 2021. They made access to all death records up to 1985, and then all birth records up to 1922, which is 100 years. So they've released more records, although they did make it more difficult for people to access just any record. You have to be related, and you do have to have some type of proof of being related to be able to access some records, which is for the protection of people. But it's nice for us genealogists that they lifted, you can get a non-certified death record clear up to 1985, where before it was up until just 1907. So that was a great thing for the genealogical community. Now here's one of our landing pages. You can search the archives collection by, if you see the box, you can put in a keyword and just search, and it'll bring up different types of records. And then you can do it also by region. So you can find it if we have it or if it might be at one of the other regions. Now we're open 8:30 to 4:30 Monday through Friday, but our other 4 regions are only open by appointment and only a couple of days a week because they have very small staffs. They might have 2 or 3 people. We do have 2 of our branches that are in universities or colleges, so they're on the campus. So they just aren't open as much as we are. And we do have the state agency records, so we have to make them accessible. And boy, when the legislative session is in, we're busy. Everybody wants to see something. And here is for the Southwest branch. It will give you a listing of hours, contacts, records management service. Also with our research room, we do have our records management, and they do help with the collections, what has to be kept, what doesn't have to be kept, how long they have to be kept. Everything is covered under some law of how long we have to keep it. There's some records that we have to keep for eternity. There's some records that they might deem that they only are kept for 50 years. So it's always covered by a law. I can't just throw a box because I don't want it. It has to be covered by some type of law of if there's any destruction. And like I said, on the side where it's in orange, Ask an Archivist, The online records, you can access them, and then the catalog, there's the 3 buttons. Here's another one of our landing pages. You can get through if you see on the left-hand side, it'll have record groups, and when you click on the records group, it'll drill it down to subgroups. So if there's some type of record within that larger collection that you want to look at, and again, ask the archivist in orange. And here is our digital archives. Now, a lot of people will put too much information in on the search engine. All you have to do is put the first letter of the first name and the first letter of the last name. It'll bring up anybody with that combination. So if you have some of the different ethnic names where you're looking for somebody, or you have a really strange, and I'll pick on myself, I have a lot of German stuff that it's just outlandish the way it's spelled. And in our catalog, all you have to do is put a couple of letters in. And you'll be more apt to find something with a name variation. So please, if you're using our catalog, remember to do that. And then you can, in the middle selection, you can search it by keyword. And then on the other one, it is a little bit more detailed. And the black ribbon across is very helpful for finding things. And on this one, Ask the Archivist is in the left-hand corner. It's not orange on this one. Now, this is the different digital collections that we have. So if you're looking for a certain type of record, you can drill down and click on that, and then it will tell you anything that has been on our digital archives. For example, if you click on to the marriage records, it'll tell you what records have been transcribed on the digital archives that you can view. That doesn't mean that that's the only thing in our collection. It means that's what we've digitized and what is available to look on online. You always want to email to see if we might have a record. There are some records that are very frail and some records that don't fall into a certain category because they might be a little bit different than the average record, so they might not be listed on our digital archives, but they might be something that are searchable. I want to bring your attention to the Frontier Justice. One of our people that works over in one of the other branches got a grant, so they're going to digitize the whole Frontier Justice collection, which is wonderful. There's many of these records that are our very first records, and they date from about 1848 up to about 1889 when we became a state. They're typically some type of court records, and the collection is very frail, so we're very happy that that's going to happen over the next couple years, that they're going to digitize that and make that available. They've been microfilmed, but if you know what a BlackBerry looks like after you've squashed it and smeared it on the paper, that's what some of the microfilm looks like. So it's going to be really nice that they're going to be able to digitize these in a high resolution and make them available. So this is a very good tool that you can kind of drill down and see what we've digitized for each collection. Now, one of the main things that we do as far as genealogy records, we do land records. And we have to remember that the records weren't made for genealogists, but genealogists are the ones that use them a lot. Researching property can be a very long process. It's just takes a lot of hours to do in-depth research. This is a very interesting home. I had somebody come in the archives and they wanted to know about some religious type of shrine home that was in the Delphi area. And I live out there and I kept racking my brain thinking, I can't think of any type of religious, type of home that was built out there. And I called my friend Karen Johnson, who is the curator over at the Schmidt House, and I said, "You got any ideas?" And she goes, "Yeah, I do." She goes, "The nuns owned the house, the little house out behind the house that's out on Delphi." And I drive by this house all the time. It was a very grandeur house at one time, and then Courtney Love bought it. I think that, who knows Kurt Cobain in here? Okay. Courtney Love was Kurt Cobain's wife. And she bought the property and unfortunately didn't take care of it for many years. So it fell into a real shambles for a while. And there is a little house out back that the nuns from St. Martin's used to use as a retreat. And that's what the person was talking about that said that she had some religious shrine that had been out on the property. It was just actually a little house that was out back that they'd used where the nuns came for a retreat. But after it was vacant for a few years and people had tagged the house, the little place out back, and there was somebody had started a fire out there to keep warm. But somebody bought it about 3 years ago, and I'm happy to say the lights are back on and it's looking better every day. And my friend Karen, who is the curator at the Schmidt House, the house was actually built by a woman who was divorced. And this was back in the turn of the century. So for a divorced woman to own property and have something of this stature, it's pretty amazing. So it's went from a divorcee to the nuns to a widow. So it's kind of, if the walls could talk, I would like to hear the story. And this is an early tax photo. It's probably from about the 1970s, roughly. But we do have tax photos. Not all the counties keep the same records, but we do have a lot of tax photos of the lot of the counties. And Thurston County's pretty good. And the types of records that you'll find in land records are going to be the indexes, which are the grantor and the grantee. The grantor is the direct or the seller. The grantee is the indirect or the buyer. And that's where you got to start. And then you have deeds, and there's all kinds of different documents that are handled within deeds. And then you got mortgages. The miscellaneous records usually have to do with easements, water rights, any type of restriction on the property. And then we're famous for tidelands. And I will have to say that tidelands are the most litigious. Sometimes we've had 3 parties that were suing each other wanting to look at the same records at the same time. That can be interesting because you're shuffling them around. But it's, and I did write a short article for our newsletter, and I attached several finding aids and a couple of explanations about tidelands in the state of Washington. Just because you own upland doesn't mean you own the stuff in the water. And sometimes you might own what's under the water, but people can navigate over the top of it. They can't just get out on their boat and step on it. And a lot of the land it's state-owned now, and it's leased. So tidelands is probably one of the most difficult things to research, but we do get a lot of requests. So if anybody has questions or is doing tidelands research, please find my article on our newsletter, and I'll show it where it lands in a little bit. And you can even email us and I can send you a link. Now, we have a lot of maps and plats, but not necessarily the type of maps that you might think about. Most of ours have to do with voting precincts, land plats, short plats, how people divided property, There can be timber cruises into how much taxes or how much value certain property have with timber on it. We don't have timber cruises for every county, but Mason County's got beautiful timber cruises and can give you an explanation about what kind of timber was on the property. Now, I will have to say that the Washington State Library has a beautiful map collection, and they're all thumbnailed and they're searchable by date range. So we don't always have the pretty maps like you would think about a map collection, but we have more serviceable maps that tell a story for certain things. Now, we have Superior Court records, and there's many different courts. Usually the Superior Court is going to have within it domestic, which would be divorce, civil cases, they can have criminal cases. That is one place where you want to start, is in the Superior Court. Now, if you have a federal court record, that would be up at NARA in Seattle. We don't have that type of the U.S. District Court. There's a U.S. District Court in Tacoma, and there's a U.S. District Court in Spokane, and there's a U.S. District Court in Seattle. Remember, those would be up at NARA. But a Supreme Court record for the state of Washington, we probably do have the cause files. Court records can be really, really confusing about where they sit, but we do have most of them in the earlier times. Anything that would be in after about 1999, you could find an index of the parties on the Washington courts. You can do it by case number and by name, but that's typically indexed after 1999. Now, we have county corrections records. Now, these are both Washington State Penitentiary and Washington State Reformatory. We do not carry McNeil Island. That is a federal penitentiary. I know that some of the McNeil Island records have been indexed on Ancestry, but that again is a federal record. And these are state records here. This is the same man, and you can see where he started and went through 4 different mugshots. He was very, very young, and then clear up. It's very interesting. We do have some people that are career criminals. And we do have we have some very interesting court cases. So that's one thing that I think is probably one of the most fun things, and sometimes it's one of the most saddest, because you hate to see somebody. I have had to process some of the collections where I've had to interfile mugshots, and it's pretty sad to see somebody who is very handsome or a very beautiful person get taken over by drugs or a life of crime, and to see their mugshots just take them down a few notches. But we have some interesting things too. I had one lady that was looking for her grandfather, and he was producing movies and writing stuff for movies while he was in prison. And everybody loved him at the prison, so you just never know about what you're gonna find. We do have some interesting. Now, as I was talking about Superior Court records, we have naturalization records that are at the county level. Now, we will have declarations, petitions, oaths, and we can have the certificate of arrival, which is the ship record, but we don't carry the federal naturalization records. Those would be up at NARA. And we've had a very robust wishing for naturalization records and requests for naturalization records for people that want to get dual citizenship. If you're working on a dual citizenship for Italy or Germany or a couple of the other countries that recognize dual citizenship, you can get a certified copy of the federal record from NARA, or you can get, if we do have it, you can get a certified copy from the state archives. But then you will have to get it apostilled from the corporation department. And that is a international certification, and that's what they require from the consulate to use those for dual citizenship. And the corporations, the apostilles that are done by the corporations, that is under the Secretary of State also. And I picked out this nun for this. I thought that was kind of interesting. And it gives her name as she changed it to become a nun and her biological name, because they always change their names. Now, we have wills and probates, but not everybody left a will and not everybody left a probate. And we're not trying to hide them. People constantly, I know that he had a will. No, I'm sorry, he doesn't have a will. I've looked, and they still don't believe you. And if you're lucky enough to get a will, they can be very interesting. Tax records. Who here hasn't paid taxes? I see nobody's raised their hand. The tax man cometh. We have a lot of tax records for the counties. They are another record that is highly used. People will decide, I just had a guy, I need taxes on my property for the last 20 years. Well, look back in your check register. Well, I can't do that. Well, anyway, it can be a very long process to go through the tax records. And I'm here to tell you, some of those volumes are like a 2-foot by 3-foot, and I have to go downstairs and get, if somebody doesn't know where their property is, I'll have to load about 5 of them on the cart for like maybe just 1 or 2 years, bring them up, and have to locate the property. So if you're ever doing property research and you want to look at the taxes, have a parcel number or a legal description, because we can better help you locate. This record right here, I had somebody that was looking for a Native American cemetery in Mason County. And I told them, have you done the tax records? Oh, no, they didn't tax the cemetery, so it's not going to be there. And I said, no, you should really look. It might be there. Oh, no, it won't be there. See the third line down? It's there. It's in red. See where it says cemetery? It was on private property, but they didn't want to pay taxes on it, so they had it listed on the tax, so they didn't have to pay taxes on it. So sometimes the absence of something can make it very interesting when it shows up. People will have stuff recorded for the darndest reasons. Okay, now, articles of incorporation. When somebody started a business, we have business records clear back to 1871. They are going to be not as plentiful as you go back in time, but you'd be surprised at how many people incorporated and started businesses in the state of Washington. And they can be very interesting. I had a gentleman that was looking for his great-great-uncle's burial place. And he said he died at a certain hospital, and I didn't know of the hospital, so I ended up having to go back through the corporation records to find the hospital. It was a Asian hospital it was in an old moose lodge up in Seattle. And I did find a tax photo of the hospital. And, there's sometimes when we just can't find certain records, but we might find something that'll tell a story. So the corporation records can be very interesting. And we have trademarks, livestock brands, and log brands. Can you imagine how many log brands we have in the state of Washington? They are some very, very interesting, and people would burn their brand into the logs so they made sure that they got paid for them. They don't only burn them in. Sometimes you'll see what looks kind of like a sledgehammer, and it'll be carved at one end, and they'll take it and they'll slam it on the end of the log to put their log brand on the end of the log to make sure they get paid for the timber. I think one of the most interesting trademarks that I ever found was a chocolate potato. People will invent the darndest things. And within the state agency records, we have governors. We have all the governors. The only governor that we have a very small collection on would be Governor Stevens. And I think that part of his collection is back at Yale. So sometimes tracking down certain records isn't easy because we're not going to have everything of everybody. We have fish and wildlife, ecology, legislative history, agriculture, state hospitals. Now, the state hospitals, northern, western, and eastern, the records are restricted. Although we can give you the population movement, which is when somebody was admitted and when somebody left. I can give you that. But I can't give you any type of medical information because it is covered under HIPAA. But I can tell you when somebody came and when they left. Now, you can also, if you've had a member of your family that has been at one of the 3 hospitals, you can contact through a public records request the Department of Social and Health Services, DSHS, and request a patient file. But the patient files prior to 1920 are almost non-existent. It might be a page or 2, and there might be nothing. But that is one avenue if you're trying to get a record. There's almost more online about Northern State Hospital than there is in our records. But Western State Hospital is probably the longest of the 3, and they transferred a lot of the records to the hospitals in 1911. So prior to 1911, they're very sparse records. But that is something that you can. Now, we do have some sanitarium records that were given to us, and there's a discussion about what we can give you and what we can't. And it's all covered by legislative or some type of revised code of Washington or federal law. So we always have updates to if the laws are amended or anything, so we know what's going on and what we can and can't give you. We're not trying to hide anything. We're just trying to cover our, you know what. Okay, Supreme Court records. We do have cause files for the Supreme Court. So a lot of the Native Americans later on would go back and sue back for the Medicine Creek Treaty or the Bolt decision and those kind of large cases. We do have some very large files. I think the Bolt decision, I think that there's like 50 or 60 boxes in several different collections. It's never just one collection that I can walk to and get everything about the Bolt decision. It might be in game, it might be in Fish and Wildlife, it might be with the governor, it might be it might be in several different places. So it's, the more specific you can be when you ask for a record, the better we can help you. Department of Transportation, if you want to know about a bridge or road or something that's going on that was, or a dam or most anything that was constructed in the state of Washington, Department of Transportation, that's one of our big collections. Department of Corrections, like I said, we have the Washington State Reformatory and the Washington State Penitentiary records. We have the commitment records, and then we have the office files. But one thing that a lot of people think, if somebody gets arrested in a city court, they may not have gone to Walla Walla or the reformatory. They might have been in a county jail. And we may or may not have those records. We don't, the auditors, the assessors, the clerks, they don't have to give us records if they don't want to. We have some holdouts. We have some county officials that don't want to give up their record. They think that they should keep them, and they don't realize that we might be able to protect them, from fire, flood, or what have you. So we don't have everything, and you got to think about where the collection might lie as to if we have it. Social health and services, we get a lot of requests for people that were put into foster care or adoption. Again, adoption records are restricted, and foster care and that type of records, you would have to make a public records request to DSHS to get your record. If you're adopted or you have a family member, the only person that can get an original birth certificate is the person or the parent. Brothers and sisters can't, aunts and uncles can't. You would have to get a court order or some type of legal backing to get the record open. And they don't carry, I can't go look at a birth record, an adopted record. They have them in a special place. We do have jurisdiction, I shouldn't say, we don't have jurisdiction over the birth records, but we do have care of some of them. They're still under the jurisdiction of the Department of Health. We can only do certain things. And we have a lot of collections that, onesies and twosies collections that, are just random. Okay, we have finding aids for all the governors. So if you want to do research on a certain governor and they have subject files, we can send you the finding aids so you can better find the information. And we have transmittals. So when a county official sends us a record, we get a list of what they sent us. Sometimes it's not drilled down to document. Sometimes it can just say, some like assessor's records. It may not tell you all the years that we're getting, so we do the best we can. Now, here's some things that we're commonly asked for that we do not have. Federal naturalization is the feds and is up at NARA, the National Archives in Seattle at Sandpoint Way. Some of the vital records. We may have the index on our digital archives, but that doesn't mean that we have the record. Death records and birth records are still under the jurisdiction of the Department of Health. Divorce and marriage after 1969, there's a record with the Department of Health, and then there's a record with the county. We may not have either one of them. Some of them might still be with the county, some of them might still be with the Department of Health. Tribal records are federal records. We have very few tribal records. What we have might be copies. Typically, federal records are going to be with the BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, or with the tribe, or with the feds in Washington, D.C. They might not even be up at NARA in Seattle. Tribal records are federal records. Newspapers. We do not have newspapers. Although they're under the Secretary of State, they're at the Washington State Library, and they have a very good index. So if you're wanting a newspaper, Washington State Library is your friend. And restricted records. I think I've kind of gone over the restricted records. Now, if there is an insanity record within a probate record, I'm not going to give it to you. You might see it in the index, but you will not be able to see that record unless you get a court order for it to be opened. If it's covered under a federal law or a state law, you won't see it. And we're bound to not show those records. But you can, by court, get them opened. Now, we have a whole bunch of wonderful volunteers that do scribe. And any of you that have free time and want to do indexing, you can create an account through Scribe. It's on our landing page, and you can help us index records. We put records out there constantly. We have a couple of women that have done over a couple 100,000 records each. And there's some people that they kind of have a race of how many records they can index. They can clear 5,000 or 6,000 records in a month. So this is really helpful, and I feel like it's a way to pay back. So even if you just have an hour a week, if you can transcribe 50 records, that's 50 more records that somebody can find. So you can find it, and you guys can take a picture of this, and it's going to be on their YouTube. So you could always see it on our website too. So that's a way to give back. And then this has an explanation of how Scribe works, so it'll tell you exactly how to do everything. And then, as I told you, the Out of the Archives newsletter, we have all the newsletters going back for the last 7 years, and I've written quite a few tutorial articles on some of the records that we have and some of the records that you can find. And you can get this, there's just different kinds of things. If we have an upcoming event, it's listed on our website. So this is just a really nice thing that you can read some of what we're doing. And do we have some questions? Now that I've totally overwhelmed you with all the records that we have.
While people in the audience are thinking about that, I have one already from an online person that I can have you answer. Jim asks, how far back do your naturalization and immigration records go?
The naturalization records go back to 1847, but I will have to say that most of the records up to about 1906 are very plain, simple, and maybe just the name, the sovereign which they denounce their citizenship to, the person's name, and maybe a witness and the deputy. They're just, until they kind of streamlined the naturalization process in 1906, that is when the documents changed and they started putting more information. And they didn't start putting photos on the naturalization records until about 1920.
Karen Johnson says, good job.
That's
Actually,
my buddy.
I should say great job. She would get me for saying just good job. Celia asks, would you walk us through the steps to request Washington territorial land records?
Okay. If you're talking about a donation land claim, which is the first time a record is transferred from the United States to a person, that is a federal record. So you can look on the GLO BLM website. That's the Government Land Office, Bureau of Land Management. And that has the index of all of the donation land claims and the first time that the property was given over from the United States to a person. Any type of land transaction after that person owns the property is done at the county level. And if the person got a piece of property by either donation land claim, a timber claim, a homestead application, or mineral, it would be at NARA in Washington, D.C. in paper form, but it has been microfilmed, and the Washington State Library does have the microfilmed paper packets for the state of Washington. And you can go to the Genealogical Forum of Oregon, and they have the ones for Oregon. And there's some provisional land claims that were done along the Columbia River, and some of those, even though the fact that they might be on the Washington side, you might find them in the provisional land claims. And those, we do have a microfilm copy. The Oregon Historical Society has a microfilm copy, and the Genealogical Forum of Oregon has a copy. But like I said, pack your patience, because land records are a difficult. It just got to follow it from person to person to person. And sometimes a person can hang on to it for 50 years, and you might only have a string of 3 or 4 people that owned a piece of property, or you can have 30 people. So it just depends on the property.
Does anyone, just raise your hand if you have a question in person.
A charge?
It depends. If you're just asking a question, then you will come in and do the research, and we will provide the records for you. If it's something that you want us to scan for you, then there will be a fee for scanning the records, because we typically cannot put them on the photocopier. A lot of times we have to manipulate the books, take them apart, and so, but we don't do the research for you, but we'll bring everything out, and we will get you started. We will hold your hand and get you started and do the best that we can, but we don't have the staffing to do in-depth research. But there is no charge for me to walk downstairs and pull it up for you to look at. The only thing that I will say that you might not be able to view that we don't take out is the Washington State Constitution. They only take it out, I've been there 7 years and they've taken it out twice. And State Patrol has been right there both times. Because this is a one-of-a-kind document. If somebody was to damage it, we can't replace that. And we're trying to put a lot of the real frail documents online so people can look at them and blow them up on their computer and make them larger, because sometimes those little ones you can't see real well. But we do help you as much as we possibly can to get started.
All right, our next question is from Lil, who asks, what is your most memorable find in the archives?
Boy, there's been a lot of them. I think one of the weirdest ones was a bullet. A man had there was a Chinese man in Pacific County that had worked and had gotten paid, and a guy took his money, and so the Chinese gentleman shot him, and in his last gasping breath, the man said, "He shot me," but he didn't say why. He'd stole his money, and it was just kind of a sad case, because even the lawyer said, it was his money, and the guy took it from him. And I think that also, too, the guy roughed him up a bit. So that was probably the weirdest thing, that we actually had the bullet that killed somebody in the archives. That was kind of strange, and the story that went with it. And there's been some pretty wild stuff. We just helped 2 cremains find their resting places. One was a little boy that had been with us for a while, and the other one was a Civil War veteran who his family he'd been divorced, remarried, and his family didn't want to be responsible for burying him, so the VA stepped up and they had a service for him. And the little boy has found his resting place too. So that's been kind of weird, because a couple people I work with thought that they were still there. Some strange things go on in the archives. There's a couple people that won't even go downstairs by themselves. I find it comforting because I love the old books. I just love the place. So, and to me, helping people with closure and find the records, I have a wonderful job, and I love it.
Question and a statement. I like the Halloween stuff that you guys do.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that's, I work with some very creative people. Yeah, so our haunted tours are wonderful.
Yeah. So if a child was put into Catholic services in the 60s, would that be?
That unfortunately is a church record and a private record. So we would not have that record. I would suggest that you contact whoever might be in jurisdiction of the records. You might see if the Catholic Church got them. The best thing to do is keep drilling until you find out who they gave the records to. And unfortunately, there is just some records that got destroyed and we'll never see them again. But it is a private record, so no, we would not have that.
As a side note to that question, I was adopted with Catholic services, and I did get my records from them because my mother had given permission, so it's worth checking.
Yeah, like I said, keep drilling until you find where the records might have gone. I've successfully helped 25 adoptees find their biological parents. There's only one that I've not been able to. I know who his grandparents are because his grandfather had an affair with his sister-in-law. So this guy's father, his half-brothers and sisters are also his cousins. So the DNA was kind of crinkled a little bit. So it is, yeah. But it is, adoptees are, they have a special place in my heart. They kind of are lost a little bit. So it's very gratifying to help somebody find their way and find closure. I think that's probably the best part of my job. I had one lady that came in about 6 months ago, and she was looking for her father's original birth certificate. And I helped her. She'd had her DNA done, and when I was looking at the record, I thought, something's wrong here. And he'd been born in Lewiston, which is right on the river, and he got his birth certificate, but the Department of Health gave him another child's birth certificate. The father's names were both William. One mother's name was Tina with a T, and the other one was Lena with an L. And both the children were born within a week of each other, But when he went to the Department of Health in Idaho, Idaho gave him the wrong birth record, and I was able to give her the correct birth. So that was, and you know, she goes, I know who I am now. You know, she goes, I'm 81 years old and I know who I am now. That was, to me, was powerful, you know, and it was just so simple is I figured out when I found the one birth certificate, a death certificate popped up for it. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. How does that happen? So that's when I put 2 and 2 together. But what were the chances that Lena and Tina would have a son named William with the same last name, and one was just born across the river? So just strange. You can't make this stuff up. Did that answer your question?
All right, well, we have several more questions, but I think we'll probably close here with one more. And I'm sure that if people have specific research questions, they can contact you at the archives.
Remember I said, ask the archivist, just push the little button and we'll try our darndest to get you to the record that can help you.
Yeah. All right, so Martin asks, what records are currently being digitized and planned in the future?
What we're trying to do is the earliest records that are the most frail, and probably the biggest thing that we're doing is the frontier justice records that are a lot of the territorial records. And those are a lot of them that really need to be digitized. And we have finished doing the military records from the 1850s. And then also, too, working with the Department of Health and the legislature to open up the death records and the birth records. That was huge, you know, because there was a lot of going back and forth about what should be private in with Social Security closing down records for 3 years. So we don't get death records for the last 3 years. It opens up. So if somebody died between 2020 and 2023, we don't get the Social Security death index. They hold those records for 3 years. But, you know, with opening up the death records to 1985, that was a huge thing. And the birth records, it's slow getting, but we just got, Ancestry is in constantly doing digitization. And they just went through a bunch of corrections records. So we partner up with Ancestry and Family Search. They come in and digitize quite a few records. But it takes time. I took a class at the Salt Lake Institute, and the vice president for Family Search was taking the same, it was a Hispanics records class. And he told me at that time, so that was back in January of 2020, right before the pandemic started, they were 16 years behind in indexing records at Family Search. And Family Search was on an aggressive stance to make their 2 million films available online because microfilm has gotten so expensive that they wanted to make them available. So Family Search, they have done some of our records too. So a lot of those records are coming online, but with Scribe, and then with Family Search also has a way that you can do volunteer indexing. That's a huge thing that it's not necessarily that they haven't digitized them, it's the indexing. That's the huge thing. The more people that can volunteer to help with indexing, the faster stuff gets up there to be searched. So I know I was kind of talking about something other than us, but Family Search is a huge partner of ours, and so is Ancestry in digitizing records.
Thank you so much, Jewel, for sharing all of your knowledge with us.
Great crowd.
Yes. That is going to conclude our program for tonight, folks. Thanks for coming down, for people in person and joining us, and thanks for folks for joining us at home. We hope you have a good night, and we will see you in March for our next History Talk.